Good evening. We are sitting down for part two of our conversation on God sanctioned five genocides in the Old Testament and the legacy of that part of the Bible. And we started by this conversation in part one by looking at what those genocides were about and the fact that they've been quoted, including recently by Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, after the Hamas attack on October 7, 2023. Those for followers of the Bible and observers, for many at least, those genocides seem to have happened. They are mentioned in the Bible. They are describing who were the targets of those genocide, by whom, the Israel, and the Old Testament seems to be pretty clear about the fact that they were God commanded. However, Your Eminence, you called that apologetists, those who look at the Bible and those genocide the way I just mentioned, as apologetists, and it seems that it's not necessarily true and accurate that those genocide were did happen, and they happen the way they are described, or they seem to be described in the Bible. You seem to be calling into question the very nature or the existence of those five genocides. So did those genocides happen or not happen, Your Eminence, and were they sanctioned or not by God?
I think I ended by talking about why apologetics about those things trouble me. Because instead of it facing the fact that likely God didn't command those at all, that was some chronicler recorded it, and the chroniclers are simply ancient spin doctors. It's sort of like you say, the victor always writes the history. Well, this is what's happening here, is that the chroniclers are trying to give some kind of shield to the people who committed the genocide by saying, oh, well, God commanded it. And then the apologists come along, and usually with bald-faced lies, will try to justify these genocides as if God had commanded them. And one reason they do that is because they've deluded themselves to the fact to say that the Bible is perfect, inerrant, and every word of it's written by God, which is, of course, obvious nonsense. But then they try to apologize, or do an apologetic for the genocide, saying, oh, you had to kill all the people because they were all demonized, or they were all children of Satan. And somebody asked, well, why did they kill the babies? Oh, the babies were all born already demonized, so you had to kill all the babies. Well, and you had to abort any babies that women were still carrying alive, because the fetuses were demonized. So that's part of the apologetic, and that begs all the questions. In the first place, did God really order or tell Moses to commit genocide against his father-in-law's tribe? What was the real reason for that genocide? And we have to understand something of the history of the era before we really can make a conclusion or an idea about it. And what was going on in the world over, say, the last 1,000 years in these cases. The thing is, they committed genocide except for the girls and women who were virgins. They were all saved, and they were carried away into sexual bondage. Now, I've heard one apologist say, oh no, they weren't carried away into sexual slavery, they were war brides. And after my eyebrows came down to the top of my head, I said, these people are insane with their apologetics. Well, what the cold hard fact is that for thousands of years, when a tribe, no matter what size, they needed more women for breeding stock. Women were breeding stock, pure and simple. That was the way these patriarchal societies and tribes ran. There was no question about it. Women were bought and sold as sex slaves and to produce children for their master's household name if they were, or just plain old sex slaves for his enjoyment. So looking at the context and the history of that era and what was going on in all societies in that era, it's easy to understand that the genocide against the Midianites was actually a raid to obtain more sex slaves, more breeding stock, more women who could be breeding stock. That's why the virgins were preserved, everybody else was killed. And the apologetics that we hear now, especially from some of the sectarian apologetics who believe that the Bible is inerrant and infallible, they have to try to justify the genocide on the basis of command theory. And okay, why did every man, woman, child, baby, fetus in Midian have to be killed? Oh, they'll say, well, they were all demonized, the babies were born demonized, the fetuses were demonized, they all had to be killed, there was no sparing them. Okay, why would we think that the virgin girls hadn't also been demonized if everybody in the tribe had been demonized? And if you took them as breeding stock, if they were demonized, how do you know the children they produced would be demonized or semi-demonized from the mother's DNA, I suppose, demonic DNA? And the cold hard fact is they made the raid on the Midianites, destroyed everybody except the virgin girls. And I mean, in that time, they would have raped a 10-year-old girl, but they were raiding the Midianites in order to obtain more breeding stock. Pure and simple. Now, I'll let apologists run away with all of that the way they want, but try to avoid some of the idiocy to it. Mm-hmm. But that was no reason to believe that God actually commanded them to do that.
So what you seem to be saying is that these actions and killings and murders and stealing of human beings were done outside God commands, outside God instruction, but they were rationalized.
And for many millennia.
And post...
millennia, a lot of the tribes we have a pretty good idea. When a group of young men in a tribal setting reached a certain age, they were kind of troublemakers and all that, testosterone, no complete brain yet. And so they would send them out in groups of 10 to start their own tribal unit. And okay, 10 men go out, you're going to start a tribal unit. How? You're going to raid another tribe and kidnap their girls as breeding stock. And we know that as a fact for millennia that went on, millennia. So what the Hebrews, if in fact that incident actually even took place at all, what the Hebrews were doing was just simply following the pattern that had been there ever since probably Cro-Magnon men and modern men afterward. And this is the way when a group of men went out to form a new unit, they had to procure women as breeding stock. And that's what women were seen as, they were breeding stock. And they would go to raid another tribe and kidnap a lot of the girls or women and take them back for breeding purposes, essentially. And that was just continuing. There's no reason to think that discontinued all of a sudden with a big zap. It was still continuing from most ancient times up to the present time. Here's a tribe wandering around in the desert, because probably half the women died in childbirth, the other half died of septic shock after the childbirth, but you always had to replenish the supply of breeding stock because women did die en masse from childbirth or from the septic shock and things afterward. So you had to replace the female population if you hadn't produced enough young women within the tribe to complete the whole contingency of breeding stock. Then you went and raided another tribe to older virgins, and very often in that activity, you killed everybody off, killed everybody else off in the tribe, and just sort of examined all the girls to see if they were virgins, and if they were, you took them. That's see the apologetic that everybody had to be killed off if they were demonized. Why were the young virgins not demonized when everybody else was? So there's no way around that really. And why? How did you know that they wouldn't produce demonized or semi-demonized fetuses afterward? So that doesn't hold any water, and it's the whole premise is silly from the beginning. But for a chronicler to say that God commanded us to do such and such doesn't mean that God did command them to do such and such. It's the fact that the chronicler, part of his job is to justify the actions of the warlord or the tribe.
But is that agreed upon understanding that it's actually not a God command, but a rationalization, a post-crime rationalization?
I don't know who believes it, who doesn't believe it. I mean, fundamentalists don't believe that God sort of thundered down from heaven and says, "Go kill all those people, including the babies." That's the way fundamentalists see it. And while you're at it, kill their sheep and their goats. So that's, fundamentalists would see God thundering down from heaven and say, "Go slaughter and murder and kill all of these human beings."
Yeah.
But I'm certain that's not what happened.
Yeah.
Because first of all, it's contrary to our theology of God himself.
Yeah.
To our doctrine about God. So when the Midianites may have posed a unique threat to the Hebrew tribes, I mean, the Hebrews probably posed a threat to them, an existential threat to them as well. So they would have wars among them, like the Hebrews and the other Canaanites, because the Hebrews were Canaanites. The Hebrews and the other Canaanites. So here the Midianites were posed a threat. They decided to conquer them and just kill them all off so there wouldn't be a problem anymore. And tellingly, when Saul wants to show mercy to the warlords, I'll call them kings if you want, to the warlords, Samuel grabs a sword and hacks them to death. And then the fall of Saul, the problems he runs into, are excused by Hebrew apologetics of the day, saying that he was being punished because he wanted to spare the warlords, the kings. So here he disobeyed God by letting the warlords live out of mercy. And so God's punishing him for his act of mercy in letting the warlords live, or trying to, except for Samuel. Now this is an apologetic attempt at explaining why Saul fell afoul and was defeated. And it's meaningless. It doesn't have to be explained. You have a battle, you lose, and you don't have to have an apologetic for it. But here's the quandary they painted themselves into. The Hebrews are under the protection of Yahweh. They lose. Why did they lose? Must be because of somebody's sins. Well, it must have been Saul's sin because he was the warlord. And so what was he being punished for? That all the Hebrew race should be punished for because of Saul. But what was he being punished for? Well, let's see. Maybe it was throwing the spirit, David? No. It must have been because he disobeyed God by letting the the Amalekite warlords live. So that's where you come to this conclusion. That's the way the apologetic mind and the mind of the chronicler works. I mean, Saul just lost the battle, that's all. Just lost him, and they evidently developed some psychiatric issues, if we're to believe all the stories. When Saul and Jonathan were defeated by the Canaanites and killed, where was David? What was David doing? Was he not cooperating with the Canaanites? So here's something a little bit tricky. David's cooperating with the Canaanites. They defeat and kill Saul. David suddenly becomes king. Did he become a client king because he'd been cooperating with the Canaanites against his own people? We don't know. We have no idea. So the apologists will make up something, whether it's true, whether it's possibly true, or whether not. The fact that David had a great love for Jonathan is clear. He wouldn't have wanted to get him killed for anything, when he heard that Jonathan was killed, he says, how are the mighty fallen in battle? Tell it not at Ashkelon and publish it. Publish it not at Ashkelon and tell it not at Gath. How are the mighty fallen in battle? That whole beautiful poem, poetry, was because David lamenting for Jonathan, and then he takes Jonathan's son and raises him as if it's his own son because of the loyalty between the two men. And but this whole story, there's much more to the story than meets the eye, and we have to look at it from a critical archaeological and anthropological voice, not try to make apologetics about it, because the apologetics are like weeping grass or something, that like placum travail. They don't really give us anything substantial. Apologetics means excuse making. That's all it means, it's making excuses. No matter how you want to interpret it philosophically, clinically, academically, apologetics is another word for making excuses.
What do you make of their response? Might be that's pretty much straightforward. I mean, if President Netanyahu called that story from Amalek publicly, it seems to be pretty straightforward about what happened or what did not happen. So is that the apologists? What you call might tell you, well, we're not making an apology for that. This is what God instructed us to do.
Apologetics doesn't mean that theoretically doesn't mean you make an apology. What it does mean is that you're being a spin doctor. In actual fact, I mean, let's look at it truthfully. The Amalekites were probably an existential threat to the Hebrews.
Right.
And you go to war with them, you want them to continue being an existential threat, so to wipe them all out, so they won't be an existential threat. We have no, as far as I know, we have no reason to believe that they saved all the virgin girls from the Amalekites. They just wiped them all out. But you don't need any kind of apologetics. What kind of sin? What kind of demonized? Were they all witches or something? You just need to know they were an existential threat to the Hebrews, and the Hebrews didn't want them to continue to be an existential threat. So the way to do that was to wipe them out. See, the thing is, if you wiped out all the warriors, what about the sons of the warriors when they get old enough to be warriors? They want revenge for the death of their fathers. So get rid of them right now and you don't have to worry about it later. This is Iron Age warfare we're talking about. And we don't need to try to make Iron Age warfare look like some kind of moral contest. It wasn't a moral contest. It was very primitive societies trying to secure themselves and their, let's say hunting grounds. In this case, it would have been their herding grounds or their feeding grounds for their herds, whatever it was, they staked out territory. This was the territory we needed to graze our herds and raise our crops.
Mm-hmm.
When somebody was an existential threat to our possession of that source of life, then we have to go to war with them and wipe them out so they're not an existential threat anymore.
Mm-hmm.
That's, now, in my perception, that's the basis of the whole story. You say, well, God commanded them to wipe out the Amalekites, right? Well, the Olympians commanded certain Greek tribes, the Mycenaeans, had to go and wipe out the city that stole Helen. You know, that they had to go wipe out those Greeks who lived along the coast of what today is Turkey.
Mm-hmm.
That part, it might not have been just that one city, but those people were somehow an existential threat to the Mycenaeans or whoever. And so the best way to do it is destroy them so they're not an existential threat anymore. They're not the competition anymore for trade routes or trade sources or trade ports. So Troy was a city, but maybe we're talking about the whole little community of Hellenes along that coast. That's part of it. And yeah, we can make an apologetic for it. They kidnapped Helen, so the Mycenaeans went to slaughter them for having kidnapped Helen, but that's a little bit of a skimpy excuse. But that would be the apologetic for it, see? So.
Thank you, Your Eminence.